Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and you'll see more of my presentation. Hopefully you're all seeing my introductory slide now. So hopefully you're all expecting a talk on the history and restoration of the Wendover Canal, which you probably know is a branch of the Grand Union Canal. And it's going to be presented by me, Clive Johnson, on behalf of the Wendover Arm Trust, for which I'm the webmaster and a long-standing restoration volunteer. So I've actually been helping restore the Wendover Canal for almost 30 years. I'm certificated, I don't like to say certified, to drive tracked and wheeled dumpers, and I'm training to drive the excavator. Since I've retired, I'm also a Trust Council member, webmaster, and I've started doing these talks. But I've actually been involved with canal restoration for a lot longer even than that. When I was well below the age that people now were allowed to work on canals, I helped with the maintenance of the then recently restored Stratford Canal and cruised almost the whole canal network as it then was with my family. At university, I ran the Canals Club in the late 70s, where we visited the early stages of what's now called the Cotswold Canal restoration and the Stratford Blitz. And after that, I helped on the Basingstoke Canal at Brookwood at St John's. Then took a pause while I got married and had a family, and then found the Wendover Canal. So first question would be, why was the Wendover Canal required? And the answer, as many of you will know, is these locks on the Grand Union Canal. The Grand Union Canal was built over 200 years ago to link London with the Midlands and had to go over the Chiltern Hills. The summit level near Tring needed a continuous supply of water to replace that lost every time the locks were worked, which is something like 50,000 gallons a time. Water supplies were plentiful from the Heron Stream in Wendover, but that was over 6 miles away. Plus, they then realised there'd be some local trade along the canal. This diagram gives you some idea of the topography that the canal is trying to come over. It's trying to come up from the bottom right from London and head towards the top middle past Leighton Buzzard to where Milton Keynes is now. There's obviously a valley here. The different colours represent different heights as shown on the scale on the left. There's obviously a bit of a valley it could have used here, but it doesn't actually take that valley. Both it and the West Coast Main Line Railway take this valley past Tring, over the hills and down again here. And that you can see here why the canal takes the route it does. And then the feed from Wendover comes along the side of the hill here from Wendover. Here for the first time then is a map of the Wendover Canal. You can see on the top right the Tring Summit and the Grand Union Main Line going past here and starting to head back down the locks at Marsworth towards Leighton Buzzard and Milton Keynes. There's the Aylesbury Arm branching off here. The early part of the Wendover Canal has always been navigable along to the pumping station here. But when we started work, the hashed area here was dry and overgrown, and the grey part here was still in water, but at a lower level. Just in case you weren't all aware, this is a canal that's owned, like most of the others, by us all, since it was nationalised in 1948, same time as the railways. It's managed for us by the Canal and River Trust, but they really only barely have the funding to maintain what they've got, and certainly not restore anymore. So now let's look at the rise and fall of this canal. And we go right back to 1793, when work started on the feeder canal, which became the Wendover Arm or Wendover Canal. And they quickly realised that with additional expenditure, they could make the canal navigable. And only 6 years after that, it's recorded that it started leaking in 1800, which was a sign of things to come, because by early in Victoria's reign, 1841,
it was losing approximately 1 million gallons of water a day, which is bad enough anyway, but even worse if this is supposed to be the feeder of the tring summit of the Grand Union Canal. So their first idea was they'd better line it properly with puddling clay. And I put a question mark against that because frankly, in the restoration we've done, there is not much sign of that puddling clay. So perhaps they then removed it, because this certainly wasn't the end of the story, because within 14 years, the leakage had increased further to 1.25 million gallons a day. Something else clearly needed to be done. So they decided they'd make their second attempt to repair using asphalt, or Tony tells me it should be called coal tar. So what on earth is this substance and why would you line a canal with it? Well, I think that's a pretty good question, because this is the asphalt layer on the edge of the piece of canal here. And if you start to look at all carefully, you can see cracks in it. And because I'm presenting this through the computer, I can zoom in a bit and you can clearly see the cracks in this supposedly waterproof layer. If I move across to one side here, there's a much worse crack. So this is a substance which dries pretty hard. It was available as a waste product from gasworks in London, including quite possibly where the Millennium Dome is now, the O2 Arena as it became. So given that this was a hard substance being laid over pretty poor ground conditions where it was going to crack, you may well wonder whether it was successful in lining the canal. And you probably guessed the answer. No, within 15 years, it was leaking worse than ever after a great deal of effort to put this asphalt lining in. In fact, by 1897, Victoria's, what's that, Diamond Jubilee, it was draining the main line of the canal, which again is pretty serious when this is supposed to be feeding the main line of the canal, through some combination of leakage and also reduced flow from the spring at Wendover caused by drought, or indeed quite possibly abstraction by local people because of the drought. So only a few years after that, they basically gave up and said that, I say they, that was then still then a private canal company, Grand Junction Canal Company, decided that the arm was no longer commercially viable and it was closed and drained between the hamlet of Drayton Beecham and where the pumping station is now at Tringford, a mile and a bit from the main line. Let's talk for a moment about that drought, because I don't think this is widely known, not just in our area, but nationally. From roughly 1884 to 1903, there was about 2 decades of quite serious drought. These late Victorian years were exceptionally dry, far more so than anything we recently called a drought. The flow at Wendover that was supposed to be feeding the canal, let alone any leakage, fell from a typical average of 40 lockfuls per day to just 2 lockfuls a day, way less than the leakage. Ironically, the decision to close the canal was taken, as it turned out, just as the drought was coming to an end. But the water was still needed. So what did they do? I apologise for the poor quality of this shot, but it's the only one we've got of efforts in the first years of the 20th century to dig a pipeline along the bed of the canal to continue that feed of water, a feed that continues to this day. Here's a modern shot. We found a spare bit of pipe lying in the bottom of the canal, and we believe that's the sort of pipe that's buried under the ground. You can't see in this shot of the canal bed exactly where the pipeline is under there, but it's under there somewhere. And that would subsequently prove to be a problem for us because we had to find it so we could do something about it. So let's look at how the water currently flows along the Wendover Canal to feed the Tring Summit. So the hash section is the dry section, which it burrows under in a pipeline. And in fact, only part of the pipeline is now in use. The water comes along and drops down into Willstone Reservoir. There's then an underground pipe to the Tringford pump, from where it's pumped back up again, something like 70 feet.
Here's the navigable section leading from the pumping station to the main line of the canal at Bulbourne. The section from Wendover to where the pipeline starts is still just about in water, though it tends to get reeded up, but at a lower level. So the bridge, if you go and look at it now, you'll see the bridges don't look too bad, but in fact there are 3 which are too low when water's at full level. And there, as a reminder, is the Tringford pumping station, and you can see nearby the 4 canal reservoirs that it pumps water back from when required by the Tring summit. Now, that is what Tringford pumping station looked like in 1910. And in 1910, it had a lovely steam beam engine in it, which would be a major attraction if it was still there. And of course, the reason you haven't heard about it is because it isn't still there. It was scrapped in 1927 and replaced by diesel pumps and then electric pumps. So the building is now only 1 story high. In the foreground is a lock. But I think I might have said that the canal follows a 390-foot contour and therefore doesn't have any locks. So what was this for? This was just really a stop lock, that if the leakage got so bad, they could close the gates and let the rest of it get lower, and boats would go beyond it at their own risk. Having said that, by the time they built this stop lock, it appears to be, they barely appear to have built it not very long before they subsequently decided to close and drain the canal. The remnants of the lock's still there to this day, but it seems to have been a bit of a folly. Some heritage of the arm which we haven't had to restore. This may look like nothing much, but it's the beginning of the canal in Wendover next to Wharf Road. And in that little brick cabin is the water flow gauge, which, if you're a water engineer, is a source of great fascination because it contains, there is a continuous record of the water flow dating back to the Victorian years. So if you're really into that sort of thing, this tells you a great deal. There's a beautiful bridge a little way along the canal from Wendover that is a pedestrian bridge across the canal near Holton, near RAF Holton, built by the Baron Rothschild in 1880, notable for its ornate blue ironwork, which was restored a few years ago. Something you won't be seeing today is that this was the original flour mill and windmill near Tring, which is now run by a company called Haygates, which is very much still with us with large lorries and a much more modern mill. The windmill is long gone, but the replacement business is still there. And next to it was Bushell's Boat Yard, which built boats which were supplied to much of the Grand Union Canal, but again is long gone, and you can't see the site because it's under part of the flour mill. Here's a very sad picture. This is what the Wendover Canal looked like 30 years ago. People often have the idea of the countryside being somehow idyllic and open. But in fact, if you leave the Chilterns to its own devices for the best part of 100 years, this is what you get. You get 20-foot high hawthorn, which literally shades out everything else. When I say it shades out, you're probably thinking that this muddy mess is the canal. That's actually the towpath. And that's a towpath that belongs to all of us for us to walk along and enjoy. And you can't enjoy that very much because it never dried out because it was so overgrown. And down here in the blackness, that actually is the line of the canal. You see how black that's become. Now, in the Chilterns, even the National Trust uses volunteers to clear hawthorn scrub like this to get a bit more biodiversity. So, and indeed, that was what we had to do in order to get the canal back. Just briefly, who are the Wendover Arm Trust? Well, we started in 1985 as a group, became a trust in 1989. Our aim, of course, is to restore the complete 6¾ mile length of the Wendover Canal. We're staffed entirely by volunteers and funded by voluntary efforts. Our plans basically were to start with the red hatched area, which was completed some time ago, phase 1, which is open to navigation now. Since then, we've been working on phase 2, the green hatched area along the hillside. The green part here was restored in 2003, at which point the canal was diverted underneath the newly built A41 Aston Clinton bypass, which I'll talk about some more in a little while. And the blue part is the area of lowered water, phase 3, which has a few challenges itself. And we'll talk about all of those things next. So the trust was formed in 1989. In 1990, they commissioned an engineering survey as to what needed to be done and started on all that hawthorn. In 1990, they successfully appeared at the inquiry into the A41 Aston Clinton bypass, which was going to be built across the line of the canal at water level. And when you're restoring a level canal, to have a dual carriageway at water level is a pretty serious problem. However, they were able to persuade what was then the Highways Agency that there was a strong likelihood that the canal would be restored. So from the budget for the A41 Aston Clinton bypass, when that was built, they actually built a diversion of the canal to a point where the bypass was at a high enough level to create a bridge underneath it. That was a very important early success. In 1997, they started construction to restore that first bit, phase 1, we'll see shortly. In 2001, we had Chiltern Bridge rebuilt. We'll see pictures of that shortly. In 2003, that diversion of Aston Clinton was actually done. Quite why it was 13 years, took 13 years to actually do it, I'm not sure. But that was done, and at the same time, there had been complaints from the people who lived in Drayton Beecham that the canal past their hamlet possibly leaked. So they persuaded Canal River Trust to pay to reline a short extra stretch professionally, which saved us a job. And in 2005, our phase 1 under Chiltern Bridge was flooded and open to navigation, as indeed it still is. And we started work on phase 2 along the hillside above Willstone Reservoir, which is where we've been ever since. We started by building 2 footbridges to separate pedestrians from our heavy plant. The first trial section was in water in 2007, 2010 another section, and so on. So enough of the words, let's look at some pictures. This was the original Chiltern Bridge, not too long before it was demolished. If you study the nice old car on the bridge, you'll realise this bridge was single track and quite a steep hump. Wendover is effectively in front of us. The canal at this point takes a giant S-bend. It comes from the main Grand Union Canal, is in the bottom right-hand corner. It goes under that bridge. It takes a big loop round and then comes back this side of the hill with the power line you can see on top. And then it doubles back again. There's a huge S-bend, which you'll see from an aerial shot shortly. But the Herts County Council were determined that this bridge was unsafe, and they demolished it in 1973. And by all accounts, it wasn't that bad, and they had a lot of trouble demolishing it. So from 1974 to 2001, this is essentially the same shot as before, but instead of the nice old arch bridge, you now just have an embankment across the line of the canal. And the shrubs show the canal bending round and back again like that. But it was decided in 2000 that not only had the Wendover Arm Trust got the money to pay to have the bridge rebuilt, but as a statement of intent, we wouldn't just put up the concrete slab at significant extra cost. we would have something that looked like a proper brick arch bridge. It still has a concrete saddle, which is taking the load, but it looks like a brick arch bridge. And here you see some pictures of them of the contractors preparing to build it. And there's the formwork, which is how, of course, you build an arch. And you can see the brickies getting ready to lay some bricks on the arch. And there you see the bricks on top of the arch, not a sight you can see now because it's covered in the road. And you'll see that if you're into these things, you'll note they're not straight. They're in what's called winding courses, which you can see if you walk under the bridge today. Here's some more shots of the concrete saddle being poured. Now this is what this one shot is taken the other direction. We've now got our back to Wendover, looking through the new arch towards what's left of the modern pumping station. And there it is finished on a snowy day in 2001. And jumping ahead, here's the canal in water in 2009. And I suspect many people don't realise that that's not a 200-year-old bridge. You've seen when it was built, it's quite recent. And we got awards for that. Here's the stop block, which was the first bit of trying to do some actual restoration. You can't tell in this shot, but the pumping station is just up here. Here's the digger digging out the stop block with the top gates are in place, but we've got stop planks in. And there's the little one-storey pumping station. Here then, this was taken, that's the white railings of the demolished Little Train Bridge, looking along the line of the canal to the pumping station in 1997. And 8 years later, here it is, lined with concrete walls. We had to do concrete walls because the land here is so narrow. We produced all these concrete walls ourselves using second-hand shuttering, which we used 70 times on this section and subsequently a total of more than 100 times. You might spot at the bottom, this is the ground layer here with some formwork, with some steel ties in it. Then we poured a J-shaped base to the wall, and then the uprights heavily braced with scaffold poles because of the weight, which then gets ready mix poured into it. Looking the other way from where we were going to rebuild Little Train Bridge, that was the line of the canal after 100 years, cleared of any hawthorn but just grass, and here it is restored. Shortly after it was restored, and it looks less concretey now. And a great advantage of this first section is that we were going to come to a natural corner, which was going to make a great turning place or winding hole, which was one of the reasons why boats didn't tend to come down the little bit of the Wendover Canal, was there was nowhere to turn. I'm just going to pause for a moment for a sip of water. So here we are digging out the winding hole. I'll just quickly skip through several slides here. Along here, we used gabions, I'm not sure how you pronounced it, so we could put some reeds along there to produce a more natural finish. You'll see more of that shortly. So here's the day of the re-watering. So there's the pumping station. A stop plank has been lifted. Water is starting to come in, and I think that's probably my bulb patch there on the right. And here is the great day when we had the first boats under Little Train Bridge for 100 years. Slightly left of the front of this boat, that's our then restoration director, Roger Leishman, who had masterminded all this. And you might recognize this fella here. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll see him rather better. That's David Suchet, of course, who's otherwise known to people as Poirot, who was a great canal enthusiast and supporter of several other canal restorations, including the Lichfield and Hatherton. And here's the winding hole in water with the reed bed on the left here. And the reed bed had the desired effect because fairly soon it had some new occupants. So that was the red hashed area. There was a lot of effort, but that got us this bit and a turning place. And since then, we've been working on the green hatched area along the hillside above Wheelstone Reservoir. Here is an aerial view of the canal twisting round. So the Grand Union itself is a couple of miles up here. That's Little Tring Bridge. The canal takes this giantess bend to follow the contours back to the end of the winding hole here, back along here, and then back down here towards Wendover that's behind us. This is what it looked like when we finished chopping down all that hawthorn scrub. And as I think I mentioned earlier, our first step was to put in a couple of footbridges to keep the pedestrians safe from our heavy plants. And they wanted a fortune to put these up, so we put them up ourselves. And there we are using plant to put the footbridges up. And there it is as it is today. Now, I mentioned before the fact that we have got a pipeline under the canal which wanders across the canal bed. And that's a problem to us because although the pipeline will be no longer required when we finish the restoration, it is a risk to the canal itself because eventually the pipeline under the canal could collapse. The 18-inch pipe could cave in and probably will cave in eventually. So we've always felt obliged to cover the line of the pipeline with a concrete capping, a continuous raft of concrete. At least we covered the pipeline when we found the pipeline. Here's on the right, you can see the pipeline apparently heading into the canal bank because it goes in a series of straight lines and then goes into lamp holes for inspection points. And then it goes out from that at an angle. So it goes in a series of straight lines without really following the canal at all. So we had to construct all this. I'm sure passers-by think we're building a footpath, but that's what it's actually for, to stop the canal going down the hole where the pipeline is. And we've also built mooring bays along the canal because, as I'm about to explain, most of the sides of our relined section of canal are at 45 degrees or certainly at a diagonal, and square bottom narrowboats wouldn't be able to moor up to them. So we've built some more vertical walls by a similar method to the phase 1 walls I just explained. And there's some more shots of that. This is basically how we have always lined this section of canal. So you remember we're only here at all because all of this leaked and had to be closed. So we need a way of lining the canal that's at least a little bit flexible. So this that looks like carpet is actually called Bentamat. It's 2 layers of carpet with bentonite clay granules in between it. It's self-healing to a degree in that if it got punctured, the clay granules would expand and stop the leaks. But there is some risk of that if we just left it like that, because 2 things might happen. Firstly, it might float away. And secondly, square bottom narrowboats are potentially going to be wearing it away at the same point all the time. So what we do is we cover the lining material with concrete blocks below water level and then basically spoil on top just to weigh it down. And you'll see a few more shots here of us constructing that. So that's a better shot. Notice the different conditions we have to work in. The previous shot, you'll see we've got blocks partly underwater here because of the rain. This is a nice dry summer's day and gives you a better picture of us laying these concrete blocks at an angle up the canal bank that we've excavated to shape. Our work parties are typically for 7 or more consecutive days around the first weekend of the month, making best use of hired plant. Typically 6 or 8 people, different people every day, guided by engineering experts, but most of us, including me, had few, if any, relevant skills until we were trained. And we do ensure full compliance with CDM and all the other regulations, which you can ask Tony Barwell about at the end if you want to. So here's a completed section ready for water with the bottom lined as well and covered in a layer of spoil. And at the end of each section, we build a temporary dam or bund so that we can then re-water up to that point. And there's a section rewatered. Great, but still a lot more to do. So the next section, 2010 to 15, this shot is taken from one of our wooden footbridges looking back towards Wendover. You can just see us beginning the pipe capping in the distance there. But the bottom of the mud in the bottom here was actually frozen solid, being December. And then the next step is to cover the pipeline, find the pipeline. So there's no clue in that picture there where the pipeline is, but that's the pipeline, and it's covered with the capping, which should keep it safe forevermore. And then when you've covered the pipeline, you build your walls along the edge, as I previously explained. And then you cover the ventimat at the bottom. And here we are in November 2014, nearly ready to rewater up to Bridge 4A. Here's the section ready for rewatering in March 2015. And there it is in April, rewatered. And that's as far as we've rewatered so far from Wendover back to Bridge 4A. Since then, we've been working from one wooden footbridge to the other wooden footbridge. Or if you like, the section we rewatered is off the bottom of this shot here. And for the last 5 years, we've been working our way along the hillside here up to we're almost ready to rewater up to this point here, where the second wooden footbridge is. Now, from this angle, it looks as though we haven't got a lot left to do, but I can assure you that's rather longer. That big long loop is rather longer than it looks. Now, at this point, I'm going to switch to something different and show you a moving picture of the section we've yet to restore. So I'm now going to click a few buttons and move to something different. So this is actually a picture that was taken from a drone for us, starting from the turning place that we restored and following the big S curve round the corner here. So ahead of us here, this hedge line is still the canal, but we're about to go round the big S bend. So you'll see where the weeds gathered at the end here. That is actually the end of the navigable canal as it currently is. And the next section is filled in to towpath level with 100-year-old domestic refuse, which I'll talk about at the end. At the moment, it's used as our materials store. So it takes a loop back towards Little Tring Road. You can see cars moving along in the background. And we come now to our car park and road access. This is you're just looking at our materials at the moment, before we come to the rest of the canal, which is not filled in like this. It's only this one section that was filled in with domestic refuse. So we're now coming to the car park and the section of the canal which we've yet to restore. We've cleared it, but it's not yet restored. So this is where we have to drive or walk along all the time to get to the work we're doing. Now, when this shot was taken, it doesn't look too muddy along there, but I think if you went along there today, when we haven't been working, it's got, I think, probably about a foot of rainwater in the bottom, unfortunately. And this massive reservoir here is the Willstone Reservoir that the pipeline drops its water down into, and Tringford pumps have to pump the water back up from, because there is, in fact, according to the books, there is a straight line pipeline going from that reservoir back, apparently takes a direct line across the S bend to Tringford pumping station from where it's pumped up today. And I'm talking here about the water that keeps the southern Grand Union Canal open. So we're moving along here to the section that we've yet to do. This is still, you'll see some first evidence here of some of our digging, and there's some temporarily stored excavated material here on the towpath bank For a while, we used track dumpers to drive along here. We weren't sure we managed it with wheel dumpers, but at the time we were able to get track dumpers fairly cheaply, but we've gone back to wheel dumpers because track dumpers are three or more times the price of wheel dumpers. So here's we're now coming to the section which we're currently working on. We're approaching the wooden footbridge here, which is Bridge 4, and there's also the remains of an original swivel bridge here, which CRT have persuaded us to point up. That's yet to be done, but we're almost ready to put the stop planks in here at Bridge 4 and put water in the next bit. So here's all the mud in the bottom because we've actually finished relining this section here. There is a large patch of land on the left here amidst all these trees, which is actually the remnant of White Houses, which was at one stage also a pumping station. And then in the Second World War, the two houses were used for refugees. As you can see here, this is the section we've already relined going up to Bridge 4A round the corner. And we hope to, well, I think we're very confident that we'll be able to rewater this year that you're seeing along here, between the two wooden footbridges. So Wendover is in the distance ahead of us in those hills, and that's where the water's coming from. So we go around the corner here and you'll shortly see the wooden footbridge where I showed you water being restored to in 2015. And there it is, and in water. Okay, so I'll stop at that point. That's the hamlet of Drayton Beach, and I talked about before. But I'll stop at that point and switch back to my slides. There we go. As I was saying, it's not always dry along the bottom of the canal. You can see the dreadful conditions we get in the bottom of the canal, and it quite often gets too wet to work. Here we are trying to set some solid blocks in the mud because it's a difficult decision whether or not to carry on working in these conditions. So if we stop working in the middle of winter, we tend to lose and may lose some of the volunteers we'd otherwise keep. Winter 17-18, we had the beast from the east, and first it froze, and then we had the snow blowing across the line of the canal. And then the snow melted and it was all flooded like this. We had to pump it all out. It was too wet to work. But we tried to carry on and we persevered. And then things got a lot better as we had a nice dry summer. And these series of pictures will show you our progress along past White Houses. Here you'll see the lined section of canal in the distance moving forward with each shot. So here's August. And here's September, and here's November. Now into 2019, it gets all muddy in winter, but even this was progress. So we were digging out the bottom of the canal here and dumping the mud on the offside bank. And you can see the bottom of the canal being filled in with mud and progressing along, and suddenly it dries out again in the summer. And it progresses further, then the ramp disappears, and we're hoping to have the bit on the offside here as a pocket park to attract people to. And here's January 2020, and we've made it to the footbridge, which is great news. But there's still a fair bit of work to be done finishing off the footbridge and at White Houses. So here are some White Houses at White Houses. It once also had a pumping station, Wheelstone Reservoir, but they stopped that best part of 200 years ago. This doesn't look remotely like this now. And there's White Houses above Wheelstone Reservoir. As we found it, all that was left was this crumbling wall, but we restored the crumbling wall with proper lime mortar and everything. And that was all done by 2013, but we then had a bit of a problem because in 7 years, it hadn't made any further progress. and you've got a navigation hazard in front of it, because passing boats will ground on all this in front of it. So we needed to agree a plan with the Canal and River Trust as to what we were going to do with this to protect it. And finally, we got agreement. And the second part of last year, we were able to build this round it. The concrete blocks don't look much, but they were soon covered in bricks. And it developed like this. So the purpose of this is that the original work is still there, and this will function as an overflow weir in future, whereas the two proud sections of brickwork will keep passing boats from grounding on the remains here. And that's how it was. It was almost finished in mid-December 2020, with just a bit of final pointing and cleaning to do. And then, of course, we had the latest lockdown. So I'm nearly at the end now, and just wanted to talk a bit more about the tip section. I showed you in the video of our section of canal which is infilled with domestic rubbish. Now, domestic rubbish was from 100 years ago, is mainly ash and glass bottles. Unfortunately, by modern standards, it also contains a very small amount of what by modern standards is called a potentially toxic element, and it has to be properly treated. This map was drawn by our previous restoration manager, Ray Orth, to show a possible plan to divert round the infill, but we've decided not to do that. And as you may have read in the latest navies, we're quite close to reaching a point where we're going to actually have professionals take away the spoil in this area. So what's still to be done is to pay professionals to clear the tip and finish the relining we went along from the video, but we're short of funds to complete that work, let alone the phase 3 I'm about to remind you of. So we're working on raising our profile in the wider local community. We're hopefully at the moment are working on potential plan to get towpath improvements done at the Wendover Arm, at the Wendover end of the canal. And then we've got 3 drop bridges, 2 of them at Buckland Wharf, including the old A41, and 1 at Holton. So in summary then, we've already opened up the scenic linear path that was just overgrown hawthorn. We're adding not just a navigable canal arm, but also much greater biodiversity. And by no means least, all the water from Wendover will again flow to the Grand Union summit by gravity, rather than most of it leaking away and the rest having to be pumped back up using fossil fuels and all the other things that people don't like. So so we started with that, and we're going to finish with that. And I know which one I'd prefer. So you can find out more from our website, which I've just spent lockdown rewriting. You can search for Wendover Canal, and we're increasing our presence on Facebook and Twitter. So that was me, Clive Johnson, on behalf of the Wendover Arm Trust. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to stop my sharing now, and I and my colleagues from the Trust Council will answer any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Clive. I know the other guys have seen this before. I haven't. I'm impressed. Great presentation and a great story. So thanks very much indeed. On that tip, Chris tells me that if there's anybody on here who's got the odd £500,000 that they can spare, thanks very much, because that will clear the problem of the tip. Otherwise, they have to raise those funds. Let's go to the first question we have, and it came from Ivan Kane. How much did Little Tring Bridge cost to replace, please?
At the time, I think there was a legacy which helped to replace Little Tring Bridge. It was around £100,000, I think, Bob, wasn't it?
Yeah, the legacy was, yeah.
Yeah, and the
90 something, 97 or something, yeah.
You were chairman at the time, weren't you? Can you remember how much it all cost?
Well, the figure, the whole figure that I have in mind, I don't have it written down in front of me, is £235,000.
Yes, that's what I'd heard.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound a lot if you say it quickly, but it was a lot of money. Most of which came, I think, yes, from that one legacy. It's maybe not such a good idea to keep saying we have a legacy, because it makes it sound very easy, doesn't it? You just wait for someone to give you all the money. But the bulk of that money that paid for Little Tring Bridge and the rest of the work came from the years of festivals that we organised. They were weather dependent, but in the main, they were very successful. I think the worst one we actually had to cancel, and the best one was something in the region of 40 odd £50,000 profit, or excessive income over expenditure, I'm told to say. Unfortunately, that period came to an end, so we're now casting around for other methods.
Okay, I have another question I've got here come in is, in view of the benefits of water again flowing to the Grand Union, is not any funding help from the Canal and River Trust available?
Well, I think that's a good question, actually. But the Canal and River Trust own the canal, and that's within the scheme of things. They've got 2,200 odd miles of waterway to manage, and their priority is obviously the navigable canals that are used heavily by leisure boaters, and the fees that they pay an awful lot towards Canal and River Trust's running costs. The Wendover Canal, the Wendover Arm, is in fact classified as a remainder canal, and it has a requirement for a minimum maintenance of things like the towpaths and so on. And I know Canal and River Trust would like to be able to put more money into restoration, ours and other people as well, but frankly, with their funding situation, there's very little opportunity for them to do so.
If I may add a bit of history, historically, a deal was done and we received a total of £200,000 from the then British Waterways Board, which was the estimated cost of what they would by now have had to pay to actually clear all that hawthorn, have the pipeline out and replace the pipeline, which was in any case going to need doing. That money was received 2006 to 10 and is all spent. Beyond that, I don't know if we can get any more.
Yeah. Apart from the financial contributions, the thing that Canal and River Trust do all the time is to provide most of the technical expertise and specifications that we work to with the canals. It is their property, after all. And in the days of British Waterways, and indeed now, it's called a different thing, but the arrangement was that Canal and River Trust or British Waterways lent us the canal whilst we fixed it, and then we gave it to them back. And we worked to their requirements, specifications, and technical drawings, etc. And that's very much still the case. And all of the design around White Houses, for instance, recently has taken literally years of negotiation between us and Canal and River Trust to decide and agree how to do it and how to do the heritage aspect of it as well. Get the right coloured bricks, get the right sort of mortar in between those bricks. And it's lime mortar, which the Romans invented, which we didn't have the skills of doing at that stage, but we now do have. So Canal and River Trust can contribute a great deal in kind, and I think that's very much appreciated.
Thank you, Chris. A question from Tom Beeston. Does the HS2 tunnelling at Wendover pose a risk to water supply for the canal or the reservoirs?
Well, clearly, potentially, it could present a risk to it. And I think there are a lot of places up and down the country where the line of HS2 crosses the line of the canals. And Canal and River Trust appointed their senior technical man, Peter Walker, to liaise with HS2 and the government to ensure that these interruptions to the water supply were minimised. And if there were inadvertently any interruptions, that there would be mitigating arrangements put in place to ensure the water gets to it. And yes, I know there's concerns about what's going on in Wendover, for instance, but it's very close to the act. But that's the agreement that Peter has with the government at a high level and with HS2 on behalf of Canal and River Trust.
Thank you, Chris. From Ian Sessman, first of all, one for you, Clive. This is a great presentation, so many achievements. Question for Clive, apart from the things you mentioned, are there any other big obstacles to reopening all the way to Wendover?
I think I covered that on one of my last slides.
How long have you got?
You did indeed, I think. Yeah, 3 bridges.
3 bridges, yes.
Some bridges to become, but we look our current mandate and our current priority is to fix the leaking section that was dried out. And yes, the bridges will need to be raised to allow for navigation in due course, and that will require considerable research and consultation with local people, etc., to decide what to do. There are no plans for dealing with those bridges at the present time, but if we can get to the stage of joining up the water and getting the levels all to the point where the water is joined up and flows by gravity into the Grand Union reservoir, that's the current major priority. That of itself would allow for navigation as far as Buckland. So both the Buckland would be the first stage. And the bridges, yes, we've got to do that, but that's a whole new ball game, particularly in terms of financing as well.
There's one factor which is perhaps mentioned, but not necessarily appreciated by everybody. And I get the question when I'm talking about the arm and the canal to people, why don't you just raise it to the full height? Well, if you do that, you flood half of Wendover because the towpath along there is too low and it's in poor condition. And yes, we've covered the fact that there's an action going along at the moment to help put that right, but that doesn't go all the way back to Tring. And so the reflooding of the canal where we're doing it won't go at the same height all the way back to Wendover until the towpath is brought up to the proper condition and level. So it's not just the canal, it's the towpath as well.
Okay, I have a question from John Richard Bennett. Is there any prospect of reapplying for a heritage grant?
Yes, there is, and we're currently actively looking at that, yes.
Good. How and COVID impact on your activity? Has it severely constrained what you could do?
Well, look, at the end of the day, we have a loyal and increasing band of volunteers. Our first priority is to keep them safe. Keep them safe with the equipment they're using. We've invested a lot of time and effort into training and certification and all of that. And also in respect to COVID, yes, we are following government guidelines, and we've spent a lot of time, particularly Tony and his colleagues, to ensure that our working arrangements fit in with social distancing. And where there are big jobs in several parts to be done, we've separated groups into sort of 2s and 3s so that we can maintain separation. The safety of our people is the priority, and at the moment we're not doing anything, and we may not manage to do anything of significance ourselves until probably April onwards. I mean, there are 1 or 2 things going to be happening which will involve contractors on the site in the near future, but for our own people, safety is always the priority, and that's will never be the case.
Quite right. And here's a big, small question from Phil Riley. Have you finally and completely solved the leakage problem?
Have we solved, sorry, say again?
Have you completely and finally solved the leakage problem?
We hope so. We are in the process of doing so. That's the purpose of what we're doing.
Yeah. That one we've had. Thanks, Clive. The towpath seems relatively high to water level. Is that the case? Have you had any problems with pressure building up under the bentamac when the channel is dry?
Tony, do you want to
Did you? Sorry, you didn't get the question. The towpath seems relatively high to water level. Is that the case, first of all? And then he goes on to say, have you had any problems with pressure building up under the bentamac when the channel is dry?
The towpath isn't that high above the water level when it's finished. The bit behind me is obviously the bed of the canal and the towpath on top, and the water will be about a metre and a half down from the towpath. But the question about groundwater underneath the bentamac is a good one, and it's something that we had to consider
very carefully, and a lot of debate was going on about whether we should put a drainage system underneath there in the case of having to drain the canal down for some reason for maintenance, and the issue then of heavy rain or other water working down through the soil, because you can see that piece behind me, for instance, is on the side of the hill. It's all on the side of the hill, but we're relatively lucky because the reason that the canal leaks is because it's all built on chalk. And in fact, the leakiest section was built on the most ancient chalk there is. It's 10 million years old. And it was laid down 10 million years ago when this piece of land was somewhere down there where the Falkland Islands are now. If you look on a map, you can find out how the ground moved over the years. And this is something we try and tell people, that this chalk wasn't really known. It's because it's really old, it's a very compact layer, and any small movement of the earth, it cracks. And that's what caused the leakage. But at the same time, the ancient chalk and the modern chalk gives a very, very good drainage from one side of the canal to the other on the side of the hill. We've actually got monitoring stations. We've dug boreholes down to the base level, several meters below the canal, and we've never seen water down there. So we don't think we're going to have a problem on this particular piece, but it is a consideration for other, if Bentamac's used somewhere else, it needs to be considered. And we may need land drains, for instance.
Okay, thanks. Chris, I've got one here from Aaron Hakeman, and I guess he's listening. I've made a note of this, and I will send you an email. Aaron is saying that he is the ex-chair of a local not-for-profit organisation, and he's got some thoughts on how they've managed to raise significant funding from partnering with a local brewery, and he's more than happy to share the details with you. I'll send you an email.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Yes, please do drop them line.
I'll send you both an email so that you can get into contact with each other. And Colin Smith, this is one I'm sure, I hope you understand the question. Could you mention the animal ladders?
Yeah, Tony, you can talk about that.
Yes, yes. You've seen the pictures there of the mooring walls, which are vertical to allow boats to moor. Unfortunately, it's also a spot where dogs like to jump in. So in the water sections, people out with their dogs off a lead, dog fancies a swim, it jumps in. Then, of course, it finds it can't get out again because it can't climb up the wall. So it swims along to where the earth bank is and scrabbles up. Well, once you've had about 40 or 50 dogs do that, they've actually dug away the soil covering on top of the mat becomes exposed, and it becomes a problem. Also, we know there's other animals like deer, badgers and all kinds of things cross the canal at various places, and we know they can swim. So where we've seen a track go across that's quite marked, for instance, what we're doing, we're putting blocks that are staggered so that there's a sufficient foothold for anything from I suppose mice and rats and things like that can actually swim across and get out. And we're building those at the end of the mooring walls, and we're retrofitting them back where in the water section as well. And this is when people walk past and they talk about animals, because you're creating something new and you're creating a barrier that wasn't there before, it's very important that we reassure people and actually do something about helping wildlife get across the canal. Although I have seen badgers and other animals go across footbridges, it's not really the answer. So this is a new innovation for us.
Thank you. Colin also asks about other works that have benefited users of the canals and the canal and towpath that you've carried out.
Other
works that have benefited users of the canal and towpath.
Well, I think the canals and their margins form a linear green park, if you like, with water in it, and I think it's there's no limit to the number of activities that you can conduct along there. And the number of people using our towpaths has hugely increased, particularly over the last year of the pandemics. And I would think from the monitoring that we do, because we've got a people counter on one of the bridges to monitor the numbers of people using the towpaths have gone up threefold, fourfold even during this period. And it's walkers, joggers, dog walkers, riders, cyclists, fishermen, and all of these people, nature lovers. And in this increasingly urbanized area, think about what's going to happen around Holton, for example, with the closure of the RAF base. 3,000 new houses is just the start of a 10, isn't it? And the canal is going to be a major leisure and health and well-being facility in all of that for the people. And if I could just mention along with that, already built into things like the Aylesbury Vale District Plan, is a project which involves the Aylesbury Arm, the Wendover Arm, and a bit of the Grand Union, called the Grand Union Triangle, which is going to be another major upgrade to towpaths. Quite a bit's already been done on the Aylesbury Arm, and we've got a project in process at the moment, which money is granted, we'll start to upgrade the towpaths from Wendover onwards. So these are major benefits to huge numbers of people alongside of the canal. Boaters are probably the fewest number of people who will ever use it, but they're not the prime beneficiaries of what we're doing.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
Just like to point out that the audience tonight is obviously IWA, and canals and towpaths and arms are not terms which they're unfamiliar with. However, we're constantly coming up against people. I mean, the last time I was on one of the footbridges putting some plaques on there, 2 separate groups of people came over the bridge. Oh, look, let's cross this old river. Oh, hang on, there's somebody been working down there, must be the council. And there's a tremendous educational job still to be done. And these were people from Tring. There's a tremendous educational job still to be done.
Yeah, there isn't. And what you're doing tonight will also help, because one of the things we do, we advertise these webinars to the local U3As, not just to IWA and your folks, but we try and broaden the level of interest for very obvious reasons. So, you know, hopefully some of that will happen. Chris, and this one's for me for the moment. Where is Buckland Wharf relative to Green Park? Is it closer to Wendover or not so?
Well, no, it isn't particularly close to Wendover, no. I mean, it's roughly in the middle of the canal, to be honest with you.
It's Aston Clinton.
Virtually the same. It's virtually the same place.
Yeah.
Is it beyond Green Park, or is it Wendover side of Green Park, or is it not Wendover side of Green Park?
If you imagine the old A41 going through Aston Clinton, it's right next to that.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the questions I've got here is, are there plans to put a slipway in so that trail boats can visit and slip into the Wendover Arm?
Well, only that at Green Park, Dave, as you're aware.
Yeah, that's something I think we're going to need to talk about from the latest conversation. But we will. I mean, certainly we've still got that as a. And for everybody who's listening, we've got, when the Chiltern branch of the IWA, we have been raising funds ourselves to build a slipway for exactly that purpose at Green Park. And as far as we can see, there should be no reason that we can't get small boats from there down through Buckland Wharf once the canal is back in water, and it's delivering water right the way through to the Grand Union. So it's that's all very encouraging. Right, we've got a few more questions here. Have you got a target date for full completion to Wendover?
I've got a piece of string here. I'm going to ask for how long is it, I think.
How many of you
But
to
we
be
would
alive then?
as a possibility.
Yeah. Who provides the civil engineering principal design to input to the project? I think you did answer that. You said Canal and River Trust.
Fairly, yeah.
Well, we have a long discussion with people at CRT,
Yeah.
Canal River Trust, and whatever we come up with, we have to get approved by them because eventually they're going to own it and maintain it. So we have to build to their standards.
But I think you have your own civil engineers, don't you? Volunteer civil engineers working with you.
We do have some, yes, but regardless of what we think, the Canal and River Trust still has to say yes, okay.
Yeah.
And we use Mick Bradley as well, of course, who's IWA and ex, who's incredibly helpful to us.
Yeah.
But for a long time, Dave, your member, Roger Leishman, and our restoration director, fulfilled a lot of that role himself.
Yeah. Yes, he was a civil engineer himself, wasn't it? Or is a civil engineer.
He was, yes.
Why did the festivals to raise money stop?
We ran out of land. The land that we were gifted each year to use on the festival was sold to a developer.
Yeah.
Who has as yet not developed anything.
Yeah.
But except antipathy in the local neighborhood. But in principle, they were not willing to continue the arrangement.
Yeah. I think we've, again, John Bryce has been talking with you, Chris, and others in terms of the land that's available right next to the current winding hole, that we can probably organise some small events there. That's something that we can again work together on fairly soon. I think I'm just about to give you the last question. If there is a major housing development in the offing at Halton, could the developer contribute to raising the nearby bridge?
Well, I think that sort of provides an opportunity in a way, because the housing development itself will generate some Section 106 money, as it's called, and certainly within that area, because it falls within the Bucks Unitary Authority now, with Halton Council being a part of the Wendover Community Board, which is now been formed. They have powers to recommend ways of spending money on benefit to the community projects. And the towpath project, which Clive mentioned in the talk just now, is based on that as well. Now, for those of you not familiar with it, Buckinghamshire became a unitary authority only in April last year. And that means you take away the sort of district council level of management. And then people locally felt, well, decision making can be taken further away from us to Buckinghamshire Council. And therefore they created these community boards, which consist of collections of local parish councils. And there are 10 parish councils in the Wendover Community Board bidding as to how to spend some 106 money. And Wendover Board felt that upgrading the towpath, which is badly eroded at the Wendover end, would be a good way of spending money. They put that forward, the community board approved it, and Bucks Council are deliberating on it, and we hope we'll come up with a favourable answer relatively soon. A decision is expected about the middle of March.
Okay, I just got a couple more questions.
Key to that has been building much better relationships with many bodies in the surrounding area to demonstrate our wider support. It's something that we've not always done and are now putting a great deal more effort into, which we're really hoping will bear fruit. Another area that the Halton housing could possibly could possibly help us is that Alex Melson of the IWA does talks about biodiversity and biodiversity net gain. And as I understand it, all projects such as that one would ultimately have to demonstrate that they had either created biodiversity net gain or had sponsored an overall biodiversity net gain somewhere else. So watch this space.
And just to finally on that particular point, the relationships that we've got in Wendover are very good, and we're trying to build the same sort of relationships in the Hertfordshire / Dacorum Council areas. And towards that event, 2 or 3 of us were actually present at Tring Town Council meeting on Monday evening this week to further that endeavour. And hopefully we think that relations at that end of the canal are now very much better than they ever were in past times. And it's very important, as Clive has stressed.
Very good. Just 2 more questions then. One is, what is the consequence for Willstone Reservoir if the canal feeds direct, is fed direct?
Well, I think Willstone Reservoir will still continue its present function, because if there's too much water coming along to White Houses, it will still go down a pipe which goes to the reservoir. And if you want to get it back up again, it brings it back up via Tringford Pumping Station anyway. So
I think the other thing we can add to that, Chris, is that anybody who wants to know a little bit more about that, if you go to the IWA TV, there is a webinar on the Tringford Pumping Station by one of our committee members, Dick Pilkington. That goes in great detail as to how the reservoirs work and how they relate to each other and relate to the canal. So I think that's the place to go if you want to get the detail.
There's some documents on our website too.
It's an absolutely fascinating place, and Tringford Pumping Station, most of it underground. You can't see it unless you go in there.
And I've got here, there is a good flow of water down to Buckland Wharf from Wendover. Where does it go after that, please?
It goes to a sump in the middle of the canal in Drayton Beecham, disappears from view into the start of the pipeline as far as White Houses. What at least some of it does. The rest has been leaking, or will have been leaking along there. And then it drops down into Willstone Reservoir, and then it has to be pumped back up from Willstone Reservoir. We know how leaky the rest of the pipeline is, because in previous years, we've tried to dispose of rainwater into the remains of the pipeline back towards Tringford. We pumped all day and virtually none came out the other end.
Right, okay. And this is, I think, I've got, until the rewatering connects to the main line, how will the water get to you? Answered that question, I won't answer that. How many pairs of ex-working boats were abandoned at Tringford? And that is the final question I'm going to ask you. Anybody knows? Right, okay. And that's not one. Oh, Bob, you know?
No, I don't know, but I'd just like to say before, I mean, I suspect that you're about to say that's the end of the session, aren't you, Dave?
I was going to say that was the last question.
Okay, well, then let me come up with the obligatory advert, because I'm in sales, so I have to, don't I? Before Dave pronounces that's the end of the lesson, I'm going to give you some homework. Visit our website, wendoverarmtrust.co.uk, and if that's too much of a mouthful, you might prefer the more colloquial title of wendovercanal.org.uk, which indicates that we are a charity. Do take a look, you might be pleasantly surprised.
And you can also get to the Wendover Arm via the Chiltern pages on the IWA website. And we will top and tail with additional information when the webinar goes on to the onto the YouTube for the hub. That anybody that wants to tell someone else to watch it, that will take 2 to 3 weeks. There's work to be done.
Yes, sir. Can I just to say, I'd just like to thank you, Dave, for inviting us to give the presentation, and to Clive, who did a great job tonight, and to everybody online who's been taking an interest in it. Thank you very much. We do hope you'll come and see us on site in due course. Very welcome.
Okay, thank you guys. A great presentation, and best of luck with the rest of it. Good luck. Cheers.